Hello, everybody. It is Friday again, and we are together here to have lunch and learn. I don't have my lunch today, but I'm definitely looking forward to this learning session. And of course, I want to say hello and welcome to the people who are watching us on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. Today, we do have a real treat for you. And the treat is called Marthe Dehli. Marthe Dehli used to live and work in Geneva at CERN. She was part of the knowledge transfer team at CERN, right, Marthe? But now she lives and works in Helsinki, Finland, where she is the community manager and the content creator for the Design Factory Global Network. Welcome, Marthe. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you so very much for having me. I'm really, really impressed with what you people, you wonderful people are up to, seeing opportunities in the middle of everything, all of this. So thank you for letting me take a small part in it.
You're very welcome. And as most of you know, Marthe will be telling us and sharing with us how to build a story. So Marthe, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I wanted to start by saying a little bit about me, who I am, why I'm here right now. My name is Marthe. Thank you for sharing your Friday lunches with me. I'm going to stick with water so that my screen doesn't get all filled with crumbles. But I spend most of my time at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland, where I work at Aalto Design Factory with the Design Factory Global Network. And as you can see from this photo coming up right here, let's see, that's me in the down right corner. I have a really, really great time at work. I sincerely love what I do with excellent colleagues. And if that smile isn't big enough, then I have another one in the next photo coming up. Some people say that their job gives them gray hair. I say that my job gives me wrinkles, but it's smile wrinkles. So then you can't really complain. That's a blessing, not a curse. I mostly work with content creation and community development, but in a team of only 2 people, we all have to wear the necessary hats when needed. I'm sure a lot of you startup people can relate to. But anyway, the Design Factory Global Network, I have a map for you here. It consists of 30 design factories spread on 5 different continents. They are innovation hubs connected to universities and research institutions around the world. And we are on the very nice mission of changing the world of learning and education through experimentation, co-creation, passion-based innovation. And I will leave it at that for now, because when I start talking about my job, I get too excited and all of a sudden this hour will be gone. But have a look at it and hit me up for anything related if you're interested in knowing more. And let's start talking about storytelling. I actually want to start off with a little experiment. In a minute now, I'm gonna share my screen and I'm gonna show you a video. And all I want you to do for now is to watch and observe what is it that you see on the screen. Okay? Let's see if we can make this correct. I will hit. Let's see, Daniel, I don't think I have the opportunity to share my screen. Is there any way we can get the video up and running? No, sorry, my bad. There we go. So just watch. What do you see? That's it. Do we have anyone among us who would like to share what they saw?
I'll go. So I saw a big triangle that was angry and going after a small triangle, and circle, and the circle trying to hide, and the triangle trying to run away, and then they got cornered, and then they escaped, and then the big triangle got angry and broke the house.
Awesome. Thank you. This video, or this little film, is from a study that was conducted in 1944 at Smith College by Fritz Heider and Marianne Simmel. Sorry. The participants were shown this very little small film, then asked what they saw. And exactly like we heard now, like out of the 30-something test subjects, everyone apart from one person would start talking about the circle being worried and the two triangles fighting. And one of the figures was described as an innocent young thing, while another was blinded by rage and frustration. Only one person saw the movie for what it actually is, which is a few polygons moving around on a screen. And the reason for that is because our brains, they are so used to looking for patterns and finding story patterns that often they see them where they don't really exist. So our brains create stories to make it easier for us to comprehend the world we live in. And as a matter of fact, storytelling is a feature that is of every known culture. Every known culture in the world has a story tradition of some sort. As kids, we were told bedtime stories or stories about this or that to keep us from doing something. As adults, we tell stories around the lunch table at work. Then we come home and we share stories about work around the dinner table. And so it goes on and on. And in her book, Wired for Story, analyst Lisa Cron, she writes, we're going to get the quote up as well, that opposable thumbs let us hang on, and story told us what to hang on to. And she goes on, story is what enables us to imagine what might happen in the future and so prepare for it, a feature no other species can lay claim to. So not only is storytelling a feature of every known culture, it is a fundamental part of what makes us human. And with Cron's quote in mind, one can imagine a scenario where one Neanderthal runs into another Neanderthal and says, you shouldn't eat that mushroom you're about to pick because the last time I saw someone do that, that person died. Again, opposable thumbs let us hang on. Story told us what to hang on to. And all research shows that if you throw numbers and facts at someone, they are very likely to forget most of it. It won't stick. There's nothing to hang it on to. But if you build it into a story, then people are more likely to remember. So if the Neanderthal had just said, that mushroom is poisonous, then the mushroom picking Neanderthal would probably have forgotten to the next time. And who knows, maybe we wouldn't be here today. However, when you build it into a story of the death of someone who's just like you, then that's going to stick, and that's going to stick with you. Now, Neanderthals gather around campfires, and we still gather around campfires as humans. We tell stories about our ancestors, we sing riddles we learned at camp, we tell ghost stories. Every now and then, I'm still terrified of finding a mummy in my cupboard because I was traumatized with the ghost story as a 6-7-year-old. I don't talk about that too much because I wasn't supposed to hear that story, but that's what happens when you're too curious at too young of an age. And stories are also a fundamental part of the religions of the world. The Bhagavad Gita, the Pali Canon, the Book of Job, the Pyramid Texts, I mean, the list goes forever on. These stories are the fundament of our belief systems as societies even today. And what's interesting with especially the religious texts is that many of them really try to explain, like stories were used as a way to explain phenomenon around us. So in Norse mythology, for instance, thunder and lightning is simply Thor who is out riding his wagon. In the Bible, the rainbow is described as the symbol God sent after the flood as a promise to humankind that he would never do anything like that again. And the rainbow keeps coming back as a way for God to kind of underline his promise. So before science, there were stories. You could, like, very simply, you could put it like that. And then you have the brothers Grimm, who were, perhaps Europe's most famous folklore and fairy tale collectors. Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, The Beauty and the Beast. These stories were simply passed down around the already mentioned campfires and on the bedside of children, from human to human, from generation to generation, as oral folk tales. And it's interesting, really, to look at, if you strip down a lot of the folklore in different countries, the stories are essentially the same. Because when traveling and through trade and wars, for that matter, stories were shipped off from country to country, and then they took just a little bit of a different, more local twist to it. But the Grimm brothers, what they did is that they actually they traveled around Germany mostly, also other parts of Europe, collected fairy tales and folklore, wrote them down, and published their first fairy tale collection in 1812. But already then, these stories had been around for ages. And I'm going to keep coming back to, Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, of all these things. And that's not because of Disney. It's because of humankind and its way of passing on stories. But stories are not just for bedtimes and survival. They have also become a very fundamental part of marketing and business branding. And that's why we're here today. And in this next picture, for instance, you have a very infamous garage where two men, both named Steve, Wozniak and Jobs, they started a company that would eventually become Apple. And this garage has become so famous that if you Google like the Jobs garage, because this is the garage of the parents of Steve Jobs, it has a ridiculous amount of hits. And same with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. As most people know, Facebook was started in a pretty geeky dorm room at Harvard, where Mark Zuckerberg and his friends were looking up hot girls on campus, wondering where they were hanging out. And today, most of us are a part of that network. They started off in a geeky dorm room. But why is it? Why is it that companies like Apple and Facebook choose to use their origin and their story as a part of their branding? That is because stories make us human. Like Han said, story told us what to hang on to, and 40,000 years later, we still do that, because storytelling is such a fundamental part of what differs us from other kinds that walk this planet. And stories help us remember. Just like we proved in that little film earlier, our brain is so used to looking for patterns that are story-like that sometimes it creates stories that aren't even there as a way of helping us to get through life and to process information. Because when told a story, your brain actually creates fake memories, because our brains are that fascinating that they can create, like when told a story, it creates images that it processes in the same way that it processes memories, which is why sometimes you should stop and ask yourself every now and then, did I actually experience this, or is it something someone told me? I think another fascinating aspect of that is looking at photo albums of yourself as a kid. And, you can very convincingly tell yourself that, oh, no, I remember way back till I was 2 years old. But can you remember anything that's not in a photo? Can you remember anything that's not a story someone's told you? It's not a bad thing. I mean, it's a great thing that we're able to do that, but it's also a thing to be aware of. And because stories are so human, they also build trust. There is something very girl or boy next door with, starting a company in your garage with your best friend, or sitting in your dorm room looking at girls, or boys for that matter. There's something very basically human about it that creates that level of trust, because we're all the same in the end. So after this little brief brief introduction to why we tell stories and how they impact our lives, I want to move on and talk about how, like, what are these stories we do? So Christopher Booker was a journalist, a writer. He was many things. He also, some of you might know that he also denied climate change and a lot of other scientific facts that most of us believe in. But he also wrote a really good book called The 7 Basic Plots: Why We Tell Stories. It's worth a read. It's an interesting read. Now, the idea of 7 basic plots was not new, but Booker spent 34 years researching different stories, breaking them down, finding patterns, finding out the different plots that writers use and storytellers use. And after 34 years, he finally released this book in 2004. And he starts with breaking down the story arch. And this is very basic. As a Norwegian, I learned this in Norwegian class. I guess other people learned it in French class, English class, whatnot, but how to build a story in terms of this arch that we talk about. And Booker claims that every story, every good story at least, follows this arch, where you begin with the anticipation stage. This is where your hero is introduced. He is called upon, called to go on an adventure. I think you can imagine any Disney movie, like the introduction of any Disney movie, where they start off with introducing the hero of the story, usually in a song. I'm not saying you should start singing. I'm just saying that that's what I want you to keep in mind. And this is followed by the dream stage, where everything is good. You get to know a little bit more about your hero. They have some sort of success. Perhaps they meet their love interest. But then we come to the frustration stage, and this is when it starts getting interesting. This is where the hero has their first encounter with the enemy, and the idea of invincibility really falls through. The climate of a good story is called the nightmare stage. This is where everything falls apart. There is like, all hope is lost. There's nothing good is going to come out of it. But hey, surprise, it does, because we move on to the resolution stage, where the hero overcomes the burden against all odds and gets the princess and the kingdom. That's how it works. Now, we're also going to walk through these with the story arch in mind. We're going to walk through the 7 different basic plots. And I'm also going to show you a couple of examples that Booker uses himself in his stuff. So the first type of story is called overcoming the monster. The hero sets out to defeat usually some evil force that threatens either the hero or their homeland, typically. And here, the Star Wars movies are a perfect example of this. Also, like, not just when it comes to this sort of plot, but also in terms of story arch. And James Bond is another example that Booker uses. I have to admit, I have never seen a James Bond movie in my life, but I trust expertise when he says so. So don't argue me on that, because I wouldn't be able to argue against. The next typical plot is called From Rags to Riches. Can you hear that dog too? My neighbor is having some issues with their new puppy. Sorry. It's very cute though, so it's okay. But From Rags to Riches is where the hero starts out very poor, very sad, acquires power, wealth, maybe a love interest, but loses it. That's for the dramatic effect, right? But then it comes back, but this time with some personal growth added to it. So again, stereotypical example is Cinderella. Cinderella is such a good story because it has so many aspects that are very, very fundamental. Cinderella is mistreated by her stepfamily, then she's saved by her fairy godmother, but then she loses the shoe and she's kept from meeting the prince again, before finally being able to reveal her true identity to Prince Charming. I'm sorry if I just spoiled Cinderella to anyone, but it's a classic, so it's worth it anyway. Aladdin is another great example where Aladdin he's a thief, he's a terrible person in many ways, but he's also very poor, and ends up being able to cheat the princess with the help of the genie. Princess finds out, hell breaks loose, but then, you know, in the end, it's all okay. Beautiful movie. And then I'm talking about the Disney version, not the live version. Next version or next plot is The Quest. The Quest. Such a dramatic name of a plot. But the hero and their companions, they set out to get their hands on an important object or to get to a specific location, usually to save it. And the story follows the obstacles they meet on their way. I'm guessing a lot of you are getting this movie in mind, which is, of course, Lord of the Rings. Doesn't get more textbook than Lord of the Rings in this case, where Frodo and his companions set out to destroy the ring, and then they overcome a bunch of hurdles on the way, up until the very last minute, really. Excellent piece of literature, but that's a different story. The next plot twist is Voyage and Return, where the hero goes to a strange foreign land, and after overcoming a threat there or learning something that they can only learn in that specific location, like a life lesson of some sort, they're able to return to their home or to their origin, where they can share this brand new experience or whatever they have learned with their home community. And here, again, excellent examples are Alice in Wonderland, and of course also Lion King, where Simba has this very traumatic experience as a child, goes away to live life and learn the Hakuna Matata way with Timon and Pumbaa, and then comes back with Nala to save the lions and the jungle. It's a great story. And the next type is a very basic, very old, classic plot twist, which is the comedy. And when it comes to comedy, Booker underlines that there's way more to comedy than humor itself. Comedy is really about creating a pattern where the conflict becomes more and more confusing. So you can't necessarily keep up as a viewer or reader or listener until, boom, it all resolves in one single event. Like, it's a very simple ending in many ways. The conclusion is always happy. It's always successful. There's always, joy at the end of a good comedy. And almost every like rom-com, romantic comedy falls into this category. So, Bridget Jones' Diary, Four Weddings and a Funeral are two of the examples he talks about, but also a classic. This painting is from a scene from Shakespeare's Midnight Summer Dream, which is also a comedy. And hand in hand with comedy, we obviously find tragedy, which is our next one, where in a tragedy, the hero typically has major character flaws, but is so fundamentally good. So even though the hero might make like stupid choices, or it obviously results in their fall somehow, they still appeal to us. Like, there's something about them. We want them to do well, which is why we get so compassionate and sad when they mess it up. And of course, another Shakespeare falls into this category. That's the beautiful Romeo and Juliet. And Anna Karenina is another classic that falls under the tragedy banner. And then the last one we have is Rebirth. And in a rebirth plot, an event typically forces our hero to change their ways, and in the process of that, becoming a better person. I know that for a lot of people, A Christmas Carol is a necessary Christmas movie, and Scrooge in A Christmas Carol is a typical character like that. The same could be said about the Beast or the Prince from Beauty and the Beast. And now you might be thinking, great, I got to walk down memory lane with all of these story references, beautiful, but my business is not Cinderella and I have no idea where to begin. And that's fine, because that's what we're going to talk about next. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about 5 things I want you to keep in mind when you're creating your story. And then I think we should head to Q&A. So let's go. 5 things to keep in mind when you're creating your business story. First one, you have to make sure you set the scene. So you need to establish the context of your story. You have to know what you're talking about, who you're talking to. So ask yourself some very fundamental questions. And I mean, like, don't just do this in your head. Do it on a piece of paper with your co-founders, with a friend you trust. Ask yourself, who is telling the story? Why are you telling the story? When and where is the story taking place? Who are the people in the story? What are you trying to achieve in the story? And what challenges have you faced? Because answering these questions will give you a very, very solid fundament to further develop your story going from there. So I'll add these questions to the slide deck so that you can get it at a later point as well. And tip number 2 is to keep it real. Like, you have to tell your actual story. Don't make up stories. Like, don't add little details. Don't add lies, because people see right through that stuff. You know, no one believes that Donald Trump had an easy start because a $1 million loan from your dad, that's not a small loan, that's a massive gift. And most people can't approach that. Like, there's no way. And you want to tell a story that people can relate to. So Apple gets away with their garage story because that's relatable. Facebook tell their dorm room story because it's relatable. It's genuine, it's authentic. And your story is your story, and that's the story you should tell. Don't fall for the temptation of adding things that shouldn't be there. Because like I said, people will see right through it. And on that note, don't be afraid of touching up on things that have been hard. When you tell the story of your company, it's fine to say that you were about to go bankrupt and you had to do something different, or you were about to give up, but then something happened, right? Because that's the story arch. And we love an underdog. We love a good hero. And that is a part of what creates trust among people and between you and your user or your consumer. The next tip is to make sure that you leave your audience with something. Be clear. Have a very clear idea of what you have to offer. So the fairy tales of the Grimm brothers, for instance, they typically have some sort of like moral aspect to them. There's something they want you to learn. And a great business story should have something that allows your customer or your client to connect with your brand somehow. Like, what is it that you provide? How have you changed someone's life? How will you change someone's life? It doesn't have to be big. It can be very, very small. It just needs to be something like to hold on to somehow. What have you contributed with? You should be able to tell a story about that. Like, what is it that you have with you? And it's important that you know what that is so that you have that goal in mind as you go on. Next tip is to be natural. And it's a bit connected to the keep it real. But this goes more on, like, make sure that you don't switch your story up too much. Like, be consistent in your communication. You should be consistent when you talk about your brand. You should use the same colors, the same logos, the same fonts. Make sure that people, like, when they see something, they immediately go, ah, that's it. That's versus virus. That's, whatever. And make sure that you know your story. Tell your story to your friends, share it with your family. My best tip is probably to tell it to yourself in front of the mirror, which feels super awkward, but it's a really, really good practice. And like, what are the words you use? What feels better in your mouth? What comes out in a good, natural way? Because the moment you know that story inside out, when you can tell it in your sleep, that's when you're ready to kind of share it outside your bubble. Now, that doesn't mean you should go on autopilot, because that's a different trap to go in. But like, make sure that you have it in your bones. Like you can have a lot of beers and still be able to tell it. That's a good thing. And then the last one is to involve your customers. People love to take part in stories. So if you have a customer whose worldview rocked some way, like it doesn't have to be big, again, it can be very, very small, but if you have a customer who can give a genuine testimony saying that like, this was amazing because XYZ, you can't put money on storytelling like that. Like that is even better than you telling your story, because then your customers have someone's shoes they can look into and say, hey, those are the shoes I want to be in. So if you have someone who's been impacted one way or the other from what you do, then make sure you tell their stories. And last but not least, be you. Make sure that as you write your story, before you write your story, when you write your story, and after, be you, because nothing is better than that. So many people can tell you what to do. So many people can give you advice along the way, and take that into consideration. But at the end of the day, you have to find something that works for you and that works for your brand. And on that note, we go to Q&A. Thank you.
Very much, Marthe. Thank you. So who would like to unmute and start the Q&A? And we have Ale in YouTube, right? Ale, if there are some questions on YouTube, please do post them so that we can answer them too.
Hi, Marthe. Thank you. Do you have examples of businesses that use those stories, either in pitching or on their websites, so we can see how to use that story arc?
Oh, so the story arc itself, you mean?
How we would use that age-old story arc, or how people have used that age-old story arc to present themselves, to present their businesses.
Yeah. So I think that's there are so many great examples out there. Are there any specific industries or fields you're interested in, or just in general?
Yes, education and technology.
Interesting. I think so. This is such a boring answer, but I think that TED, as in TED Talks, they have some amazing speech coaches or like presentation coaches. So I would go to TED and I would see, like, look up what you think is good or like what you're interested in. And then with this story arc in mind, have a look, because this is like textbook what they do. So I think that's yeah.
Okay, thank you. I wrote it down. I would also like to know if you have any favorites that you think, this is how it's done.
Tough one. So I get to see some really impressive student presentations that make me super happy. Like, not necessarily because they are textbook story arch, this is how it should be done. But just because there's so much passion for what they do, and they they can get away with the quirkiest thing just because they're so good at it. I think I had a previous colleague of mine. He worked for a startup company that did autonomous drones. I also did some, like, full disclosure, I did some marketing work for them for a while as well. But the way he spoke about his project was also with such passion and such, like, because they had a very clear problem they were solving. They wanted to create like the ultimate bragging machine so that you could always show off your tricks in the snowboard, half pipe and whatnot. And the way they did that was just so cool. Like, you get this feeling that like, I want to be that guy, which is really awesome. And I think that if you go around on, like, you have so many good pictures and so many good people presenting these days on startup gatherings and whatnot, that the world is so full of excellent speakers. I don't know how good your Norwegian is, but there's also a really so that's my native tongue. And just like as an idea of like how weird you can go, one of my current favorites is a Norwegian priest who like takes scenes from the Bible and he plays them out on Instagram. And one of the ways he's done that is that he bought a bunch of these mannequin dolls, so these masks that clothing stores usually use. And he's like dressing them up as the disciples and as like John the Baptist and playing out all of these different scenes as a way of getting young people more involved in the church, or at least like realizing why they're celebrating Easter, which I also find like such a brilliant take on storytelling in many ways. And then there's TikTok. That's a whole other area of storytelling again, which is also a lot of fun.
What's the name of that Norwegian priest?
His name is Presten Per. I think I wrote it. I'll double check and I'll get back to you if that's not correct. But yeah, he's funny, like just for the yeah.
Thanks.
While others are thinking, I would like to ask a quick question. So, as far as I understood, there is the arc, and there are the 7 types of stories. So, if I am to write a story, the first thing I'll do is I'll choose what type of story I would like to write, whether it's going to be a tragedy, a comedy, or one of those 7. And then once I choose what kind of story I would like to write, I go and follow the arc. Did I understand it correctly, Marthe?
Yes, I think that's a good take on it. There are also very many different ways of operating. So, hopefully you have a clear idea of, I think if you start out by asking yourself the questions, you will see like where is your story most likely to fit.
Okay.
So I would maybe start with answering those so that you know your basis, and then it's easier to find out where to apply it in terms of the different plots.
Okay, beautiful. That's a great tip. I would have not thought about this one. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Claudia, I can see you. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. I would.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Lovely. And from what I understood is that the storytelling, it's about the founder or it's about the user that we are doing the story about of the business. Do you understand? So please help me with that.
Yes, I think that's a very, So I think what's important to keep in mind as well is that no business is the same. And, these are some tools, and then you have to apply them the way that fits you better and that fits your company better. I think it's always good if you can, start, especially if you're a small company. So say you're the founder and you do everything. Then I think if you're able to share a little bit of yourself and what you do as a way of building trust and kind of opening up, I think that's a great way to start. But then I also do believe that in the long run, a customer story is probably worth 10 founder stories if it's really good. Sorry, Claudia, I saw you disappeared there for a while. Did you get some of it?
I did my internet connection, but thank you. I'll check the rest of the answers, but thank you anyway, Marthe.
Good, thank you, Claudia.
in addition to telling our story, we also write stories for kids. Would you, which we have no experience in, actually, would you recommend that as Storytelling for Kids 101, that book by Christopher something?
Oh, yeah, have a look at it. I also think that writing children's books I have a friend of mine who does that, and I think it's a very underestimated profession because kids are hard. But have a look at it. And there's also a book by Stephen King. Sorry, it's in my bookshelf, so I'm just gonna double check it's
Yes.
called On Writing by Stephen King, which is half of it is his biography and the other half is tips on how he does his work, and like tips on how to write a story, write a book. And I found that to be such a good read, and I still actively use it a lot. So that's, if you know what you want to write, then that's also a really, really good. Or if you're just looking for inspiration, because he has a lot on that too.
Thank you. Can you say the name of the first book again? The 7 stories?
7 basic. Sorry, gonna look it up so that I get it absolutely correctly. And that is the 7 basic plots why we tell stories. Also, if you just look up 7 basic plots, then he's usually your top hit.
Thank you.
I have another quick question, Marthe.
Mm.
Would there be situations in which you recommend storytelling versus rational reporting and vice versa?
Scary one.
No, because sometimes we need to make those choices, right?
Yeah. I think so we have that in my job. We do, it's hard to measure often what we do. Like a lot of what we do can't be put into numbers. But then a lot of us answer to people who want numbers. So I think that in the ideal world, storytelling itself would be enough. But they can also be so impactful that sometimes it's better to get the numbers, to get like the cold hard facts in a way. You can't get too mushy with the stories either. So I think like a good annual report, to put it that way, has a good combination of the two. I think we need numbers for certain things, absolutely. But I'm weak for the stories. Can't help it. I would much rather read a report with nice stories in them. Also because I think that's better on a longer term plan. Like people will skim through, say you have a visit of some sort, or you're giving out a booklet, and someone will skim through it. There's no way they're going to remember the numbers that are on that page. But if you have a good, impactful quote, or like a very, very short story on what you do, then that might actually stick, and they will tell that story to other people as well. So I don't think the power of that should not be underestimated either.
Thank you so much. And another quick question, because I'm so curious about this. And my question is, your job is to build a community, right? Part of your job. So do you use storytelling to bring about this community and to animate it and to bring it to life?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. Now I have an excuse to nerd about what I nerd about best. So one of the things, I started this job a year and a half ago, approximately. And as I said, there are now 30 different design factories in, I think it's 9 different time zones, where the biggest time difference is 16 hours. So creating a community there is hard. We meet up once a year to do all the big strategic decisions for the network. Now we won't even be able to do that, and we have to move all of that online because of the C word that should not be mentioned. And so how do we work around this? What do we do, and how do we create community? And one of the projects that I started before COVID has actually turned out to be super important or very, very valuable throughout this year, which is that instead of the regular reporting where, the design factories would write a little bit about what they've been up to, they would give us all these key numbers that stakeholders typically want. I took the time to interview representatives from all the 30 different design factories, asking them the 7 same questions, because our network is so value-based. Like, we are like-minded people working towards a common goal, but in different contexts, in different cultures, in different host institutions. So with very different starting points. And by asking every design factory the same 7 questions, you get an idea of who the people behind that design factory is, getting a feeling of that community, the person behind that name on Slack, the person behind that email signature, the design factory behind that logo. You get an idea of who they are. And by telling stories instead of relying completely on numbers, I think that we are able to introduce people to one another in a new way, even though we can't, unfortunately, meet up and hug and kiss like we prefer to. So yeah, that's been really great, and also such a great opportunity to connect over video link instead of just in writing.
Beautiful. It's the first time I see a job description that brings the content creation and the community together. I'm really amazed by it. I think it's the right way forward. So, are there any more questions? If there are no more questions, Marthe is going to write for us the questions for the context, right? And she is going to share them in the PowerPoint that I'm going to share with all of you, so that you can write your context and see in which one of those plots your story is going to fit, and then apply the arch, right? Thank you so much, Marthe.
I have one last question.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, Marthe, can you pick one example origin story for a business and tell it with the story arc, with captions? This is the trough of, what do you say? Disappointment. This is the climax. This is the resolution. This is the status quo.
Oh, wow. Like right now? Off the bat?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I tell my own?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That'd be even better. Yeah.
Give me a sec. Okay, so setting the standard. Imagine you're standing on the top of a hill. There's like powder snow, so pure that you don't even, like, you can mirror yourself in it almost. That's how beautiful it is. You're standing there, you set down the hill, and you finally nailed that 360 that you have been working on for months, right? We have a dramatic start here.
Mm-hmm.
You turn around, get to the bottom of the hill, and you realize that no one saw it. You don't have single proof that this happened, and your friends, they don't believe you. What if I told you that you could buy a drone, that you could fasten your, so there you have the drop, right? We have the climax, everything is falling apart, you nailed it, but then there's no one can see it. There's no evidence. But what if you could get a drone that you fasten your GoPro camera to? All you have to do is push a button. The drone follows you, constantly finds the best angle to shoot you from. It captures you, and you have the ultimate bragging video to show off to your friends as you finish your ride still by yourself. Not as good as it could have been, I have to admit, not my best work, hard to think while talking. But yeah, like do you see it, Miguel? Like, is that kind of an answer?
Yes, and at the end it's the resolution.
Exactly, because then you get to brag to your friends and family, which is what skiing is all about, I've heard.
And I love how you introduced the product. What if you had the drone, right?
Exactly. Beautiful. So it's all about creating that, putting the customer in the scene, make that memory, place that memory in their brain. I think that's important when you talk about business development, especially.
And then you played with my emotions when you were telling me the context. I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful. Oh my gosh, I want to be there. And when it dropped, it was like, oh my gosh, that sucks. That really sucks. I feel so sorry. And then again, you picked me up and you're like, but what if there was this drone? So, my emotions went up, down, and up again. Mm-hmm. So you also played with my emotions, I guess, right?
In a good way, I hope. In a good
yes,
way.
Yes, in a very good, in a way that kept me listening and kept me asking for more. Hey, tell me more. What happened? I can't live with this emotion anymore. Bring me to a new emotion.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Miguel, are you happy with this answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so everybody, Marthe, thank you so much for this amazing presentation.
Thank you.
As usual, it has been a pleasure, an honor, and a delight to listen to you. Dear participants, you will get the PowerPoint presentation with the context questions in the Slack. And of course, we will be having another Lunch and Learn next Friday. And next Friday, we will be having Ezekiel from PP. PP is an amazing startup that saves the water in the world. So instead of flushing the toilet, you spray. He will be sharing with you how to make an amazing pitch deck. So that's all from us for today. Have a lovely weekend and enjoy it. Bye. Bye, Marthe.
Bye. Thank you.